Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, my name is Nanda Lusiasafitri. My student ID number is 222-322-0034 and I'm from class 3A. This video is made for complete my academic speaking assignment. In this time, I would like to give a summary about a paper that given by my lecturer with the title Study Abroad's Contribution to Critical Thinking and World Citizenship. This paper was written by A. Min Nguyen. I'm so sorry if there is mispronouncing. The reason why the author wrote this paper is to defend two theses due to Richard Paul and Linda Elder. The first thesis is creative thought and critical thought cannot be separated, and the second thesis is the intellectual traits constitutive of critical thinking are interdependent. And now we go to the first one, is about the benefits of study abroad. Study abroad is typically described as life-changing. It is because the study abroad helps shape a participant's life for years after the experience. In 2002, the Institute for the International Education of Students, or IES, conducted the largest survey of study abroad alumni ever. The IES Abroad 50-year alumni survey confirms the long-term impact of study abroad on a participant's personal, academic, and professional life. The data from 3,723 respondents who participated in IES study abroad programs between 1950 and 1999 suggests that study abroad had a beneficial effect on participants' maturity, education, and career choice. It showed that study abroad truly contributes in personal growth. For instance, can increase self-confidence, enhance maturity, empower to tolerate ambiguity, and modify socio-political positions. In intercultural development, study abroad can gain a deeper understanding of their own cultural biases and values, help to develop a more refined way of looking at the world, inspire them to cultivate a more diverse circle of friends, and encourage them to explore the other cultures. In academic commitment, study abroad raised the interest in academic study and strengthened their commitment to foreign language study, and also helped shape their subsequent educational experience. In career development, study abroad triggered an interest in a career direction pursued thereafter, enabled them to acquire skill sets that influence their career path, enhance their ability to speak a foreign language used in the workplace, and prompt them to engage in international work of volunteerism. The next one is the beyond the cultural and linguistic benefits. Tracy Runstrom Williams shows that students who study abroad generally demonstrate a greater increase in intercultural communication skills after their time abroad than students who stay on campus. The strongest result from Irvine Clarke-Tree and others show that students who participate in study abroad not only improve their intercultural communication skills to a greater degree than those who don't, but also achieve a significantly higher level of intercultural communication after they experience than their stay-at-home counterparts. Living abroad has been found to boost creativity. William W. Maddox and Adam D. Galinsky and others discover a robust correlation between living overseas and enhanced creativity, identifying adaptation as the critical mechanism that underlies this linkage. They hypothesize that adaptation may be the key psychological element that explains why living abroad is associated with creativity. Because culture is such a pervasive force, impacting and shape every aspect of one's life, adapting oneself to a new culture, learning how to behave and think in a different way, make individuals chronically aware of multiple perspectives and approach when dealing with mundane and novel situations, and thus may be associated with increased creativity. While traveling overseas might not enhance creativity, living in a foreign land and adapting to a new culture would. Insofar as study abroad augments the chance of cultural adaptation, participants are poised to gain from enhanced creativity. The next one is the inseparability of creativity and criticality. Study abroad encouraged the development of both critical and creative thinking for two reasons. The first reason, according to the commonly accepted model of critical thinking developed by Richard Paul and Linda Elder, creative thinking and critical thinking are so interwoven that neither can be separated from the other without an essential loss to both. The second reason, in line with the Paul Elder model, certain traits of mind, the growth of several of which study abroad has been shown to advance, constitute critical thinking, and the traits are interdependent such that the acquisition, possession, retention, employment, development, and enrichment of one requires the same of the others, and our critical thinking will be compromised if we are severely lacking in any of these traits. Whether creative or critical is a cognitive achievement, something which the mind must work to attain. Some may oppose the inseparability thesis because it fails to delineate important distinctions and ultimately conflates two different ways of thinking. Opponents may invoke the following passage to justify their stance. Whereas creative thinking is divergent, critical thinking is convergent. Whereas creative thinking tries to create something new, and critical thinking seeks to assess worth or validity in something that exists. Whereas creative thinking is carried on by violating accepted principles, while critical thinking is carried on by applying accepted principles. Although creative and critical thinking may very well be different sides of the same coin, they are not identical. There are three reasons for rejecting this critique. Secondly, the objection assumes that the creative or critical distinction maps neatly onto the divergent or convergent distinction, but this assumption is tendentious. Logicians, mathematicians, and scientists can engage in convergent thinking by attempting to solve problems that admit one and only one solution, and do so in a creative manner. Similarly, writers, composers, and artists can engage in divergent thinking by attempting to forge new ideas and new inventions, and do so in a critical manner. This conclusion is consonant with both the hypothesis that divergent thinking and convergent thinking are two major components of the creative process, and the finding that creative people deploy both forms of thinking well. The next one is the interdependence of intellectual traits. Paul and Elder conceive of critical thinking as the art of analyzing and evaluating thinking with a view to improving it. Their conception of critical thinking as an art notwithstanding, according to the Paul Elder model, the traits characteristically present in critical thinkers include intellectual humility, intellectual courage, intellectual empathy, intellectual perseverance, intellectual integrity, intellectual autonomy, confidence in reason, and fair mindedness. Intellectual humility consists in the Socratic knowledge of one's own ignorance. To realize what we know and what we don't know, we need both intellectual integrity and intellectual courage. Intellectual integrity enables us to be true to our own thinking and to recognize the limits of our knowledge as well as the limitations of our point of view. whereas intellectual courage enables us to squarely face our own biases, prejudice, and whatever else is responsible for our own cognitive shortcomings. The reason intellectual integrity requires intellectual autonomy is intellectual integrity consists in being true to one's own thinking, being consistent in the application of the standards one uses to assess one's own thinking, holding oneself to the same robust standard of evidence one expects others to meet, and acknowledging inconsistencies in one's own thought feeling action matrix. These are nothing but different forms of thinking for oneself in accordance with standards of rationality, and such thinking for oneself constitutes intellectual autonomy. Intellectual courage requires intellectual empathy. To discover our own biases and prejudice, we often must entertain views that differ from our own and reason for premises with which we disagree. Like intellectual autonomy and intellectual integrity, intellectual empathy requires intellectual perseverance in addition to the generosity and flexibility of mind that enables us to switch from one perspective to another. Likewise, intellectual empathy requires confidence in reason and fair mindedness, in addition to creativity and imagination. Our attempt to put ourselves in the place of others to understand their ideas will be unwarranted unless we have sufficient trust in reason to believe we will not be contaminated by whatever is false or misleading in the alternative perspective under consideration. Faith in reason and the conviction that we will not be harmed by considering novel or foreign viewpoints are not sufficient, however, to motivate most of us to consider them seriously. Our motivation must also derive from an intellectual sense of justice. Consequently, if we are to commit ourselves to the fair play of reason, we shall have to be just to the views we oppose and consider them in their strongest form so as not to dismiss or disparage them out of ignorance or bias. To discharge this duty, we need intellectual humility, which is what we posited at the beginning. The next one is the cultivation of critical thinking. Study abroad spurs the growth of several intellectual traits. Recall the IES survey. They all confirm that the study abroad contributes to personal growth, intercultural development, academic commitment, and career development. This body of evidence shows that study abroad furthers the development of intellectual humility, intellectual courage, intellectual empathy, intellectual perseverance, respectively. Compared to Tracy Ranstorm Williams, a multidimensional qualitative approach to study abroad assessment, Williams' study, which relies on more than just self-report measures, indicates that study abroad students generally demonstrate an increase in each of the following: understanding of international and cultural issues, flexibility and adaptability in new environments, tolerance toward and comfortability with people of culturally diverse background, open-mindedness and curiosity, and critical skills such as resourcefulness, creative thinking, problem solving, decision making, socialization, negotiation, leadership, and teamwork in culturally diverse settings. Given the interdependence of intellectual traits, if study abroad furthers the development of intellectual humility, courage, empathy, and perseverance, it is also furthers the development of intellectual integrity, intellectual autonomy, confidence in reason, and fair-mindedness. All intellectual traits constitutive of critical thinking are thus enhanced, and so is critical thinking itself. The next one is the Socratic ideal of rationality. Socrates was a critical thinker par excellence, the Platonic form of critical thinking, as it were, As evidenced by Plato's dialogues, he manifested all intellectual traits constitutive of critical thinking. He demonstrated intellectual courage by challenging the prevailing ideas and practices of his day. He demonstrated intellectual empathy by accurately stating, developing, and refining the positions with which he disagreed, all the while making respectful reference to other cultures such as Egypt and Persia. He demonstrated intellectual perseverance by struggling with substantive and difficult issues such as the above and othering to rational principles despite irrational resistance from others. Socrates was both proponent and an example of a quiet demanding paradigm of critical thinking. In augmenting critical thinking, therefore, study abroad makes a contribution to the realization of the Socratic ideal of rationality. Such a contribution consists in helping cultivate fair-minded, creative, and critical individuals and societies. When educated in, it cannot be stampeded by storm orators and are never deceived by dithyrambic oratory. They are also slow to believe. They can hold things as possible or probable in all degrees, without certainty and without pain. They can wait for evidence and weigh evidence, uninfluenced by the emphasis or confidence with which assertions are made on one side or the other. They can resist appeals to their dearest prejudice and all kinds of cajolery. And the last one is the Diogenian ideal of cosmopolitanism. In addition to critical individuals and societies, study abroad helps cultivate citizens of the world and the single community to which they belong. Study abroad thus makes a contribution to the realization of the Diogenian ideal of cosmopolitanism, so named in honor of Diogenes in the Cynic, the first thinker to have called himself a citizen of the world. In cosmopolitanism, Wame Anthony Appiah defends what he calls partial or root cosmopolitanism. Partial cosmopolitans take side neither with the nationalist who abandons all foreigners nor with the hardcore cosmopolitan who regards her friends and fellow citizens with icy impartiality. Study abroad enables participants to develop these traits of mind. It strengthens their cosmopolitan commitments and helps realize not only the Socratic ideal but also the Diogenian ideal. So, is the paper useful or beneficial for the readers? Of course, this paper is very useful for the readers, especially for people who want to do study abroad. By reading this paper, readers can find out that study abroad has many benefits. Readers can also know how important the contribution of critical thinking when doing study abroad. And is the paper have the weaknesses? Of course. The weaknesses of this paper is there's nothing to be prepared for and whatever difficulties to do abroad studies. And for the future action, I will tell you about the step to start study abroad. The first step is knowing yourself. To doing everything, you must know about yourself. You have to identify and do reflection about what you need, what you like, and what you can do. The second step is do a research. Once you do some research, you will get an idea of the subject areas that interest you the most. You could look at some course descriptions, university reviews, and their locations. You can also start a wish list of your preferences and begin to narrow down your selection. And the most important part, don't forget to research about the scholarship program to facilitate your study abroad. The third step is knowing your capabilities. You have to know what is you're capable of. This is so important because when you go to another country, your life will greatly change. So make sure that you know your capabilities so that you will not be troubled and will be easier to deal with the changes in your life. And the fourth step is set your goals. You must know what your goals before you study to another country. You have to set what will you do, what will you achieve, and how you achieve that. Remember to go to another country, make sure that you have checked out the destination country, like its environment and its atmosphere, so that will be easier to achieve your goals. The last step is take action of your plan. Remember to take your action seriously because there will be many people who put their hopes in you. I think that's all for today's discussion. I hope it helps. Thank you very much for watching. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.